Talk Shoe. Recorded live.
Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you may be across the nation or around the world. Once again, you're listening to the VMware Communities Roundtable podcast. This is podcast number 605. My name is Eric Nilsson, and with me today I have, again, my favorite co-host, Corey Romero. Today is Wednesday, May 18th, 2022. Corey Romero, how you doing today?
Doing fantastic. The weather in Utah has turned. We have hit high 70s, low 80s. So weather's nice. Been getting outside when I can, but everything else as well.
Awesome. Well, on the show today, we're going to be talking about Workspace ONE and enterprise mobility management. We've got our Adarsh Kesari, Adarsh Kesari. I think that's how I say it. We'll get to his name in a minute. I always mess up the names, but he is a staff solution engineer, EUC Americas. So we got him on. I'm excited to hear about him. I always love when I hear about people that are a little bit out in the field or end user computing for Americas. That'll be cool. I think he's in the Southeast region, but maybe we'll find out about him in a little bit. Adarsh. So, but before we get to enterprise mobility management on the show, let's talk a little bit about what's in the news and what's happening. So, Corey, I'll go first, and then I'll flip over to you just to hear some of the exciting stuff that we're talking about for the vExpert stuff at Explorer. So, first thing I want to talk about is Explorer. It's happening. Reg is opening. vBrownBag has community sessions. I heard from Alistair that he's got over 30 vBrownBag sessions submitted. So, thank you very much to the V community, everybody out there, for submitting the sessions through vBrownBag. That's great. I'm excited that we already have 30. He's expecting another 10 or 20 more. So we'll probably have 50 community sessions happening in the community booth at VMworld, both in the US and Europe. So I'm excited about that. I'm super excited because we're always anxious to see how many people coming out of the pandemic are going to actually come to VMware Explorer. And so I'm excited about that. And thank you for signing up for sessions. I'm excited to see everybody there, and we'll go from there. On the developer side, VMware Code, the code coaches have submitted a lot of great talks there. So we should have, 20 or 30 good code talks on data center automation. So I'm excited about that. And then I remember 2 years ago, if you came to VMworld in 2019, we had Raspberry Pi area up in Moscone West, I think it is. And we did Raspberry Pi sensor giveaways and sensors. So we're going to do a twist on that this year. We will be doing labs, but we're going to be using NUCs. So we're going to have NUCs, which are, if you don't know what a NUC is, you probably do because you're listening to this podcast. It's a x86 small 86 box. And we're going to have NUCs there, and you're going to get to provision Tanzu Community Edition on the NUCs. We might actually have a lab that allows you to compile the open source from GitHub. So if you want to actually see what the open source is about and you want to tweak some source, we're going to have some developer activities, but also some traditional IT configuration of the NUCs for Tanzu Community Edition. So if you haven't done Community Edition, you'll want to pay attention to those labs. We'll promote them. I'm super excited about that. We might also we have a way to do sensor programming on NUCs on x86. So we might do a little of that, as well as a lab that allows you to migrate your workload up to Tanzu on AWS so that you can see how Tanzu runs in the cloud. So super excited about all the momentum we've got with the VMware Explorer event team funding some of this stuff. So excited about that. And then, of course, Corey, we're talking about maybe we do something a little bit different, a party versus a giveaway. What do you think of that stuff?
I think I like the idea of the giveaway, especially if something really cool and valuable. I also do like the party. I like the interaction, the networking, just to see everybody have the conversations. But I also do have to have those conversations just during VMware Explorer as well. So I'm on the side of a gift this year.
Yeah, I'm a little bit on both sides of the house, right? Like there is the neat idea of getting everybody together, but then I'm also looking at the risk of getting 700 or 1,000 of us all in and eating some barbecue like we did a couple of years ago. So kind of excited about that. Get a pig up, get it barbecued, or other meats or other vegetables, and doing that. But at the same time, there is this moment of transition where we've got Tanzu, Kubernetes, and wouldn't it be cool if we could find a low cost, we have some friends at Intel, get a low cost NUC that we could buy, and then get everybody that's at VMworld a NUC, right? Like we gave away Raspberry Pis back 3 years ago. Wouldn't it be cool to get a gift bag with a NUC in it, right? Then you can go do the Kubernetes lab over in the code lab area, learn how to install, configure Kubernetes, learn how to put your workloads up on the cloud, and all of a sudden you get to just put that on your resume. So if you haven't spent time, and I know that a lot of people of you have already been exploring, but another half of us, and note the word explore, another half of us would like to do it, but we never carve away the time. And the best way to get somebody to do something is hand them a device and say, here, make it so. And so that would be fun to do. So I think we're having discussions about that. I did talk to my vice president about, what do you think? And he knows people at Intel too. So maybe we'll get NUCs for everybody, but I think you have to be there, right? What do you think?
Yeah. You have to be there. Have to be at VMworld just like every other year when we do the gifts. Right. It's shipping is just an absolute nightmare for us, unfortunately, due to all the countries and customs and legal issues and everything else. I love the idea of the NUCs, especially the value that carries. Right. That'll go on for a long time, way beyond VMware Explorer. So I'm on the side of that as well.
Now, I give everybody a heads up. If we do give away NUCs, we're looking for the deals to get, because, if we give away 500 or 800 or 1,000 NUCs, that's like $100,000, $150,000. And one of the best ways to cut the cost of NUC, you know what the best way is?
What's that?
You order the NUC with no memory.
Yes.
So don't be surprised if you get a NUC that's a brick that you're going to have to buy your own memory. So just be aware of that.
Hey, that's okay, right? If you got to spend a little bit of money to get it going, right, for the benefit of the community and the rest of the experts who are.
We're not going to give you a keyboard and a mouse and a monitor either. So I look at that stuff as just peripheral to the device.
Yeah. I agree. Yep.
All right. With that, thanks a lot for the news, Corey. Appreciate all the work you do with the vExpert stuff. Let's get to our guest today. So Adarsh Kesari, did I get that right this time?
Pretty close.
Pretty close. Why don't you tell us how you say your name and give us a little bit about, how long you've been at VMware? What do you do? And what's your career arc look like? How did you get where you are? Have you worked at other companies? How long have you been working? Give us how you got here.
Yeah, absolutely. No, and appreciate you guys having me on this podcast. So my name is Adarsh Kesari. I'm a solutions engineer in the enterprise mobility, so the end user computing group inside of VMware. I've been at VMware 7 years. My 7 years just hit over end of April. So I'm from Australia. You can probably tell by the accent as I go through this.
I was going to ask. It sounds like you're from Britain, but Australia, close enough.
Yep. So I've been at VMware 7 years, did a couple of different roles, all of it related in end user computing at VMware. So various different SE roles. I did an architecture role inside of the EUC business unit for a little while as well. So lots of interesting perspectives in end user compute. Where I sort of came from, it's probably it's a bit of an interesting way to look at this. So studying, I did my engineering degree back in Australia. I've got a degree in telecommunications engineering. Kind of interesting the way that my university was set up. So it was a 4-year engineering degree. And the way that it actually built it out was that they made it a 5-year program with 2 6-month internships built in. And you had to do it as a full 5-year program and you get your degree at the end of it, which was kind of unique. It was unique for the university that I went to in Sydney. More often than not, you typically see the 4-year engineering degree. And then in Australia, you've got to do a 12-week experience program afterwards to actually qualify to get a degree. So I went to go work for an investment bank at the time in IT, right? I wasn't the banker dude. I was just we worked in aptly named the information technology group. And so this was 2010 when I had joined on. So I started off doing a little bit, what started off as a bit of a rotation. I started off doing a little bit around voice and data networks. So Cisco UCS, the voice stuff, not the server infrastructure UCS, the one that no one absolutely has any idea about. That's the way I think of that, UCS. And inevitably ended up getting involved with a bunch of collaboration tools. So at the time we were implementing Office Communicator 2007, Microsoft Group Chat. So those were the the core instant messaging infrastructure that we were trying to build for the bank, for how traders communicate with other traders, how they trade with other continents, and then also with other customers out there. And this might be the crudest way to put it, but one of our divisional directors at the time went to a partner event and had won the Lucky Door Prize, as you do, right? As you do as a customer, you win the Lucky Door Prize. And he had won at the time an iPhone 3. And we were at the time Australia's largest BlackBerry shop. So I was involved in the build out of the BlackBerry messaging services to make sure that we could support the latest BlackBerries that we had. Meanwhile, this divisional director turns up and goes, "Make this S word work." And that was it. And that was my foray into enterprise mobility. It was my foray into a little bit of, as a precursor to device management, how to get email onto an iPhone, which at the time was the least secure thing you could possibly have out there in the world. So it's like, here's a enterprise secured BlackBerry, and here is this random iPhone thing that apparently you can get some cool apps and everyone's talked about it. And then it's grown from there. And so my background of enterprise mobility always stayed around a little bit. I actually stayed in that organization for about 2.5 years. So I worked and studied at the same time. I actually ended up moving to what was the Citrix team. So I worked on their Zen app implementations and parts of their Zen desktop testing that they did at the time. For my second set of rotations, as I was going through my college degree, I actually went to go work for Citrix. So I worked in a group called Citrix Labs, which was really their 24 to 36 month sort of incubation project team that was in R&D. So it was a bunch of people who were doing due diligences on companies that they were looking to acquire, as well as sort of thinking about and building out prototypes of product that could be something that the industry goes to. So for me, it's always been around the idea of not so much where a product strategy goes, but how does a product itself or a strategy drive an entire industry a different way? And you almost think of sort of what's happened right now as a little bit of a mixture of all of that, because you look at some of the remote work principles that we've always had through VMware Horizon, Citrix Zen App and Zen Desktop in the past, and enterprise mobility, and you look at COVID and it's like all of a sudden, all of our traditional paradigms have truly changed, and we have to sort of, maybe because of a global pandemic, changed our entire way of looking at this. And so that was a pretty unique experience. From there, one of the crazy story along the same lines of that was I went from working on a 110 decibel trade floor at an investment bank to 40 decibels with a bunch of developers. I actually moved my desk right next to the meeting group so I could sit next to the meeting room so I could just get ambient noise in there. It was insane. Right. And these were, 10-foot cubes. You couldn't work out if anyone was at their desk unless you went around the maze to go find people. It was quite interesting, which actually got me into a pre-sales role, because it's like, okay, this guy can talk. This guy really enjoys the product, wants to go talk to a bunch of customers. Let's get him into pre-sales. So I did an SE role in Australia and New Zealand for Citrix for a couple of years afterwards. I left Citrix. I went to go do some consulting work with a partner company that was a Citrix and Microsoft partner for a year. And then I knew a few people at what was at the time AirWatch. So AirWatch was acquired by VMware in 2014. I'd known a few people at AirWatch at the time. I'd always wanted to come over to the States, albeit for a little while. And so I actually got hired by a gentleman who ran sales engineering out of AirWatch. He interviewed me over the phone from Australia and said, "Yep, look, well, let's make this happen." So I joined AirWatch after it was acquired. So it was kind of like that weird transitionary period where my paycheck officially said VMware, but it was AirWatch by VMware, and all of the HR processes were happening behind the scenes. But they were very much two autonomous companies when I joined, and that sort of product and strategy integration sort of happened in the preceding years afterwards.
Yeah, it is interesting. I was going to say that I was going to talk to you about the industry, and do you remember the days when there was just BlackBerry, right? And then you covered it, right? Which is like, yeah, that was where we at. And when the iPhone came out, everybody was like, "No, we're not going to use that. Nobody can use that. You're not going to have that." But then they sold. There were lines at the Apple stores, and all of a sudden it became apparent that everybody had to deal with that. And then it didn't have anything, right?
Well, the craziest thing for a long time, and I still think people do this to this day, albeit to a smaller extent, is the idea of having two phones. Here's my personal one, here's my company one. And back in those days, it was, here's my BlackBerry, and here is my iPhone thing. It does something on it, I don't know. But that's how people sort of treated those two worlds. And very much, this BlackBerry idea died very quickly. And just the groundswell that happened, I remember at the time, it was, this is really testing anyone who does know enterprise mobility from back in the day. Sybase iAnywhere, which was the product that was used to deliver email on iOS securely. It really was crap. And just to watch that industry continue to develop as MDM became sort of a standard that got built into the framework, that really started start the idea of, okay, BlackBerry replacement projects are a real thing. People are starting to look at mobility very seriously and start looking at these devices that they use for, being able to get access to some fun applications that they use in their personal life. Can they get business critical apps on there as well?
Right. I kind of smile because like your career started out of college at iPhone 3, right? Like my career started at VMware like a year before iPhone 1. And I remember getting an iPhone 1 and I was like, oh my gosh, I took the plastic off. And I was sitting in my VMware office when I opened it. I bought it and I brought it back to my VMware office. I was sitting, I opened it up and I had my son with me and we're both looking at this thing amazed, right? And like everybody had BlackBerries. So we all had chiclet pagers and all that before that. So it's like, it's just interesting. Your career started with an iPhone 3. And I was going to say, and then we look at VMware, and VMware wasn't in mobility, didn't have a footprint at all. Citrix, even a desktop space, Citrix was killing us, right? Like it was, Citrix was the leader in desktop, and like we were getting beat up until I think we hired Sanjay Poonen from SAP, and he bought AirWatch. It was that transition that got VMware a solid footprint in the mobility market. Otherwise, now we did have at the vSphere a better way of running VMs that are your desktops, and so we kind of had an edge in the enterprise space, but we had no edge in the desktop mobility space or the desktop space or the nothing. We were very chunky.
Well, it was interesting because, like, I mean, the rhetoric that every Citrix customer said back in the day was a good Citrix customer runs XenApp and XenDesktop on VMware vSphere. Right? It always has been. That's always been the backbone behind everything. So to hear VMware get into mobility, you're like, that's a bit odd. And I know there's always been Horizon, and I was a Citrix guy. I knew XenApp and XenDesktop incredibly well. And so you kind of look at Horizon and you go, well, same thing, just different badge kind of thing a lot of the time. And just, I mean, to be perfectly transparent about it, when I was at Citrix, this was 2013, Citrix had acquired a company called ZenPrize, which became their MDM product. So I was part of the group. I didn't do any of the work around the due diligence to work out whether they were going to acquire an MDM provider, and they chose ZenPrize. And it was almost a full year later that VMware had acquired AirWatch, and it was like, at the time, it was like, really? You're going to copy the same strategy that's going on? So it is interesting that VMware started seeing it. And you're right, under Sanjay's leadership, it was very much, let's see where the mobility space can actually start adding to the value proposition of the VMware solution stack.
Yeah, right, and a lot of re-architecting, that went on during that phase, right? It reminds me of our cloud strategy, where when we got into the cloud business, we didn't know what to do. We created AirWatch, not AirWatch, vCloud Air. Sorry, AirWatch desktop. vCloud Air. vCloud Air was very, was poor or a mess, right? And it took us like 4 or 5 years to get our feet under us and then start the multi-cloud strategy. And I looked at that same transition in mobility, right? And I feel like when the iPhone came along and the iPad came along and the whole ARM, mobile market came along, it broke the lock that other vendors like Citrix had on this space, right? I think that if it hadn't happened, we would never have been able to get a footprint there. But because everything shifted, they were in a transition to true mobility as a maybe a 30% solution, like 50%, 70% still desktop, but then you have this mobility and that transition allowed VMware to bring in the AirWatch, get the solutions, and start actually winning business, or use AirWatch to win the business directly, right?
Yeah, very much so. It was interesting. It's almost like two different factors happen at the same time. You look at sort of Citrix and Horizon at the same time. The best of the mobility offerings outside of taking an MDM in there, both of those products decided to put a mobile client like Horizon or the Citrix receiver onto an iPad, and they said, look, you can run your virtual desktop on an iPad, which kind of sounds like enterprise mobility in some respects. But no one wants to use a thick Windows application on an iPad. In the meantime, platform ecosystems like Google and Apple decided to make the way to distribute applications and write applications a little bit easier for developers. So all of a sudden, you started seeing Salesforce start delivering a mobile application. You started seeing Evernote and OneNote and Dropbox all starting to be mobile native applications with native editors, native abilities on a mobile device, which users were going, well, why am I accessing it through this clunky system instead? Can I get this more native experience? And that's really where MDM really did start to show its value significantly.
What does MDM stand for?
Sorry, I use acronyms like we all know it. Mobile device management. So actually, it leads quite nicely because the whole thing has changed, right? So when I joined 2015, it was the mobile device management, and that was it. That was all anyone knew. And you could actually break it out. You could go mobile device management, obviously, how you manage one of these things. Mobile application management is what security policies do you apply around the app. So you'd occasionally you hear MAM being used around as a term. We even had things like MEM, so mobile email management. So how do you deliver ActiveSync to a mobile device, but then put a level of security around your ActiveSync connections to make sure that you can quarantine devices that are not trusted at the ActiveSync endpoint, so they're not getting email. Then there was things like mobile content management, where at the time back at AirWatch, we were delivering files and data that people use in their day-to-day world into this app that we call the Content Locker that allowed you to go view them, edit them, make changes, and send them back. So many different realms. That whole thing it almost exploded a little too quickly because of a couple of core changes. The second thing that happened in that industry is Windows came to the party. So when Windows 10 got released, Microsoft said, hello, we like the idea of this MDM stack that you've got for iOS and Android. We see that as sort of the future. Can Windows 10 be that platform? And it was, gosh, you could probably go back. It was 1607 of Windows 10 was probably the first release that really started overlapping what was traditional SCCM policy with MDM policy. They started becoming things like equivalence between the two. There was, hey, here are all of your GPOs, and here is a subset of core critical MDM policies that overlap and match with GPOs. And over the years, that has started to increase. And so instead of it being sort of the industry being called the mobile device management space, it sort of took on a new guise and almost got renamed to enterprise mobility management was the next name that came up, so EMM. And then it grew even further to UEM, so unified endpoint management. And it's the idea of having one management tool to manage all of these different edge endpoints. So that's Windows, Mac OS, iOS, Android, as well as your frontline and ruggedized devices. And that whole industry sort of like exploded significantly, and the definitions have truly changed from what it used to be in the past.
How close are we? Like if we look at unified enterprise management, like how close are we to having that solution with Workspace ONE? Are we, I guess we should start maybe talk about the products a little bit and like, yep. So where's VMware? How many people are stuck in various stages of this evolution, and where are we going? So maybe we could slice a little bit of the solution space up.
Yeah, big time. And Workspace ONE is an interesting one because as a product itself, it's got a sort of an umbrella name. It has multiple different products under the scenes. If you're old school like me, you'll still call it the AirWatch console once in a while and just slip the tongue. I feel like I'm going to do that with VMware Explore. I'm just going to say VMworld like we all do. We'll get there eventually. So when you look at sort of as an industry, you look at iOS and Android devices almost exclusively, they are all being managed by some mobile device management provider. So in our case, that's Workspace ONE Unified Endpoint Management Console, so UEM. So we manage those devices very well. It's almost been the bread and butter of our solution stack for a very long time. We have the same platform. We can use that for Windows and Mac OS, Chrome OS, and ruggedized. So in terms of sort of comparing against other providers out there, we absolutely have a solution that really does encompass all of these different hardware manufacturers and OEMs. And we've done some pretty good integrations around all of that. The real challenge with this market is actually traditional process. And I spent 2.5 years doing an architecture role specifically around trying to drive Windows 10 adoption. And the biggest challenge to sort of driving Windows 10 adoption into this UEM world, as opposed to what they currently do, is, hey, we know what we currently do in our SCCM system. Why change it? Right? It's the notion of change that is the trickiest thing for a lot of IT organizations to get past, because the solution itself is actually not too dissimilar, albeit we're delivering all of these policies, we're delivering all of these applications and all of these configurations from the cloud rather than from some sort of on-premises infrastructure set, right? So the transition of taking, I want to go rationalize all of my Windows group policy and move them to MDM policy just seems like headache as opposed to a revolutionary step for a lot of people. And I think that's the biggest drawback that we have at the moment around adoptions. Because if I was starting a company tomorrow, I would absolutely not be using something like an SCCM or a traditional PC lifecycle management tool to manage my Windows devices. I would absolutely put that into a unified endpoint management tool. And that's the thing. So it's like you could go around to all of these big companies, and more often than not, the biggest challenge we run into is, hey, how do we firstly do this transition? How do we operationalize this transition? And then more than anything, it's like, oh, but things kind of work okay so far. What is the cost of change at this point?
Right. Yeah. What's the benefit of it, and how long can I squeak out some last amount of functionality before I have to move, to the UEM? Right. Like I definitely see that, and for me, the industry shifting, and then I think the cloud revolution and SaaS service revolution in general, like, all of a sudden I don't need anything installed on my desktop anymore. In fact, is there even need for a desktop? Like I'm using all of my Word from Microsoft off of Azure, from some cloud. Everything is cloud now. I don't have anything left here. I'm looking. I got maybe I got iTunes, right? That I still download some because I got all my music still left in there, but everything else is, variously a cloud service, right? So what does it actually mean to even have a desktop now? And then my enterprise apps are transitioning, and then you have so much transition to cloud, to, transitioning the apps themselves to, the Kubernetes framework and the microservices and all the apps that are coming. It's like you look and you go, okay, now where's the desktop piece fall into that? I'm curious how, when you get called in because you were an architect, how much of that was dependent on all the other moving parts that are happening in the data center?
Yeah, it's an interesting one. It happens quite a bit. I think the really interesting one is I almost turn up to most customer engagements and go, where are you on your app journey, right? Because inevitably you'll end up finding customers end up in, call it 3 or 4 different places. Number one, if I have legacy Windows applications that I have no interest in trying to move to any platform, whether it be cloud native or a SaaS app, I'm going to put that into a virtual session. So I'm going to put that through Citrix or put it through Horizon and deal with that problem, let it die by itself kind of thing. That's generally been that approach. Approach number 2, I'm going to try and decommission that application and go buy off on a subscription service that's out there. I'm going to move my CRM into a Salesforce. So you're working through that journey. There are some that it's like, okay, I need offline access. I need mission critical access. I've got potentially a use case where these workers are out in the field. Those devices will never really have a stable enough internet connection. We're going to have an app that, updates back to a database at some point periodically. Those might be the ones you end up having to go, okay, I still need to go deliver native applications to that particular case. Or alternatively, number 4 is, hey, we're going to go rebuild that app as a cloud native application, and we can remove some of the infrastructure requirements that we've had in the past. So for me, it's about going through with a customer and going, okay, let's think about all of your endpoint applications, and then let's understand your app journeys, right? And go, where are you now? Where's your 6 to 12 month roadmap for this app? Where's your 24-month roadmap? And then how do we, the piece that I want to get involved in is, how do you then go and map a simplicity of a user experience to that particular journey? So for example, if I've got an app that I think is going to die away in 24 months, but I'm going to put it into Horizon, how do I enable things like single sign-on so your user doesn't have to go authenticate at multiple different places at the Windows desktop, the application itself, to then get access to the resource? Because that's 2 layers of headache that they don't really need. If that's going to be a SaaS-based application or a cloud-native app, how do we then go fit this into a modern authentication framework and do SAML-based authentication? How do we take device-based information and feed that into that authentication workflow to say, oh, you're accessing from Starbucks. Maybe in that particular case, we're going to prompt you for 2-factor auth, but you're coming in from a trusted network. You might be in the VMware office, for example. As a result, we're going to give you a seamless single sign-on experience. And coming in from a trusted device, maybe we take that and make it a little bit easier for the user. And sort of that's where the evolution of this has gone from. It's gone less of just being, how do we secure a device? And it's now, how do we secure a device, deliver applications, and then make the user experience incredibly seamless along the way?
Okay, cool. I got a side. We'll take a break here because I know everybody's been listening. So I'm going to have some fun with this question, right?
Cool.
Which is, and I've heard this from a couple of guys I know in Silicon Valley, right? So Apple decided to move to ARM on their desktops, right? And it was always a really easy story when you had x86 running on your Mac, right? Because all the apps, if I want to get Fusion, I could run Fusion. I could run my x86 app on Fusion and be happy. All of a sudden, Apple going to ARM broke a lot of people and broke a lot of that model. Well, it's x86. And I don't know if that's accelerated things or slowed things down or broke things. In the land of watching that play out, have you seen any stories where all of a sudden people bought 500 new ARM Macs and realized that applications don't run there because there isn't an x86 CPU there any longer? Any thoughts around that?
I have had my fair share of angry customers and angry customers at ISVs about it as well. Quite an architectural change from Apple's perspective. We did know about it, so like our
I felt like it caught people by surprise. I think I've heard a lot of stories where they just assumed that it would just all run, right? That Apple would have a laptop that would deal with that, like the old Carbon framework or whatever from the old days.
Yes. So the biggest challenge was, so at least from an R&D perspective, we kind of knew the changes like that were happening. What we needed to do was make sure that the Workspace ONE intelligent hub, so the agent that's responsible for delivering MDM policy, was going to function. So there was some efforts done on our Apple product management team to make sure that happened. Ultimately, where this got really hairy is you think about antivirus and firewall products. They're struggling big time at the moment, right? There were so many of them that customers were like, this doesn't work on M1. Not going to happen. We have to wait on, and
security issues.
We're going to have to wait. Yeah, we're going to have to wait on all of these vendors for that. So it was a bit of a disaster in some respects. I think at the same time, with all of the chip shortages and stuff.
Yeah, that was
alleviated a little bit.
That was my follow-up question. Was that the story I had was that they bought a bunch of M1s, right? Like 1,000 M1s for their engineering groups, right? And then they all got them and discovered that their AutoCAD stuff just didn't run, right? Like there was it just no, not even close, right? And so then they had to fall back and try to get, but they had thrown all their Dells away, right? They had refurbed their Dells because they didn't realize that when they got over there that they all got them, and all of a sudden they're like scrapping and trying to unscrap their Dells, right? And then you can't buy Dells because you got chip shortages, and so all of a sudden they're looking around. Nobody knows how to do their engineering because they can't. And it was like one of these things that caught everybody by surprise because no one really recognized that they have kind of a carbon environment where you can run x86, but if you got a complicated x86 app, it wasn't going to run.
Well, it's interesting. At the same time, the other thing that sort of picked up is with COVID, the remote work from home, virtualized desktop use cases grew significantly. I think if you look at sort of the 3 or 4 years preceding the start of the pandemic, Workspace ONE momentum was very much the way to go. It was all around enterprise mobility management, unified endpoint management. And then the brakes kind of halted for a little while where customers started realizing it's like, oh, we need business continuity and we need to go invest in our virtual desktop environment because we have everyone working from home for the foreseeable future. And I think a lot of that happened. It's like, oh, okay, so we've got apps that don't work on our MacBooks because of other problems. Don't worry, we have a virtual environment. Let's go deliver that application via a Horizon session, and let's get a minimum level of business continuity before we go and let the ISVs go solve that problem. Let the chip shortages get by.
Yeah,
so
everybody was dealing with the continuity. Just get a solution that works at home.
Just get something out there. Exactly.
What was it called? The ACE player, desktop player, something like that, where it was like everybody just wanted a virtual player that would allow you to run a virtual machine down so that I could actually run one thing, right? So that is interesting. I suppose that took a lot of bandwidth, just everybody dealing with that for the last 2 years.
Big time.
Other thing I had, which is along those lines, is bring your own device, BYOD, right? And then work at home. I guess that all plays into like nowadays at VMware. I just had somebody start, and on the ticketing system now it just says the person has their own device. Let them use. They don't even ask me did they want a device. They just have a checkbox that let us know if the person doesn't have their own device, right? And it assumes that the person has their own device, and that we'll just provision you some stuff as SaaS services, and you use they're not even offering to get that new person. It's a contractor, but nonetheless, they're not even offering. They're just saying, well, it's an exception if that person actually needs a device now. Yeah,
it's the new modern way, I think. And I think it is the right way to go. I think if you look at where we've wanted to go with this, BYOD programs have taken different forms. I've worked in companies that have BYO programs. I've helped customers come up with BYO programs as well. It comes down to a couple of things. Firstly, on a mobile phone, these things are really easy. If you look at iOS and Android especially, from a management perspective, they're straightforward. From a platform perspective and an OEM perspective, really easy. So you're going to get an Apple device from an Android device. There's 3 or 4 major OEMs. You can do really a lot around making sure that these devices are cool. And generally, people have got some sort of warranty policy around their devices that you apply policies. But hey, if something breaks on that device, that's a contract between you and your provider. Where this gets a little bit interesting, I'm finding, is around the MacBooks and the Windows devices, because customers are looking at this idea of BYO, and I think they end up settling on this idea of choose your own device, which is more like, we want you to get any device you possibly can, but we know that this is actually an agreement between me and the company, which if my memory dies on this particular laptop, well, I need to have someone who can hot swap this or order me a new memory, a new piece of memory that I need to put in the device, because that person is potentially not a technical person. So inevitably, here are 4 or 5 different models that IT has approved that we have memory ready to go. We have a new hard drive if you need. So we have the ability to go give you a new device easily, because you don't have the equivalent of the Apple Store as easily on those other platforms. So that's one part. The other part is, how do you reimburse users as well? And so I've worked with a bunch of customers around how to go build a BYO policy that incentivizes people. So it's, do you pay their phone bill like VMware does for us? Do you potentially pay for a device and retire the device after 3 years and say, look, we purchased it for you, we've paid it off, you can have it after 3 years or something like that. So depending upon the organization and sort of the risk profile that they have around it, you can kind of tailor a BYO policy. What I've found really interesting is everyone has sort of a nuanced version of it, right? And everything sort of changes based on the organization, based upon the risk factors that they have. I'm working with a customer right now who's saying that, look, we want to do a full BYO program. We don't really care what device someone's accessing from. However, the only thing that they can access is a Horizon desktop, right? That's it. They don't want them to go down the path of a native application. They don't want them to have access to SaaS applications outside of a virtual desktop. And for them, it's all around security, right? And it's, hey, in order to make sure that we have the maximum layered security for us, we're going to do that via a virtual desktop, because that's going to give us the most solace, which is very different from BYO policies that I've heard from other places and VMware as well.
Yeah, the security policy that's needed on your device, right? You're better off just having a virtual machine stream to you so that you don't have to have the layers. Because I've talked to my friends who like, yeah, by the time I get my Dell up and running, right, it's like running at 30, it gets 30% of the CPU, 70% of the CPU is used by the security profile to keep everything secure on it. And it just becomes so risky, especially if you're running or you're an engineer working on source or other things like the people trying to hack in, put holes in your source, and next thing you know, they're ransomwaring you, right? And so it is interesting that seems to be a case. Somebody had on chat with chip shortages and problems of acquiring hardware in bulk now. Is that swaying anything? I know that it's hard to even get monitors for home, right? Like there's
I'm trying to get a new one at the moment, and that's not happening anytime soon.
Right. So maybe that's slowing some of this transition down at the same time because you can't actually get hardware, but maybe it's accelerating it because enterprises just go, hey, if you've got one, we'll let you use it, right? Because we don't really have a choice.
Yeah, it very much is. The other thing that we're typically seeing at the moment is because of these shortages, it's like, okay, device refresh cycles blow out from, hey, if you're going to get a new device in 3 years, you're going to get it in 4 instead.
Yeah,
so
right.
We'll buy off on that problem later. At the same time, it's, can we give you a virtual desktop to come up with the stopgap in between? The beauty of almost all of this is, again, people are starting to move towards cloud-based applications. We're going to get to this position where we're going to use virtual applications potentially for some of our apps. We're going to use cloud-native applications as well. We're going to need to run stuff locally on our endpoints as well. So the key thing actually ends up being security, and it's to what level of security do I want to have on my physical endpoint, and then the interaction between a SaaS application, a virtual session, or a native application with the operating system and other parts. So can I compartmentalize parts of my operating system to make sure that it is a company-owned, company-controlled sort of section and segment of the device? And how do I make sure that that doesn't interact with a personal section? And mobile phones do a really good job of that. And I think we're now starting to get to that place more with Mac OS and Windows, which has just not been anywhere near as simple.
Right. That makes sense. Yeah, I could see that. And I know that, we're getting a lot of people. If you want hardware, they just like go buy it. Let us know what you bought. We'll make an exception.
We'll reimburse you at some point. Yeah.
So as we go on the last 15 minutes of the podcast, or maybe 10, depending on how you count it, I always ask, like, so where do you think all of this is going? What's the innovation that you see that's going to be the most exciting for the industry going forward? Maybe it's cloud, everything cloud. We got so much cloud going on. We've talked a little bit about SaaS and cloud and the services and that. Where do you see some of the interesting trends taking us?
Yeah, certainly from a VMware perspective, the biggest sort of solution that you'll hear a lot more at VMware Explore this year is around the Anywhere Workspace. And it's a little bit of the lessons learned from the last couple of years of COVID and the fact that people are not all going to go into the office, and they're much more this hybrid workforce going forward. So it's, how do we deliver you applications securely, regardless of where you are, through a service edge that has DLP policies applied to it. So you'll hear a lot around that. For me, actually, the more interesting thing, and sort of the area that we're finding a lot of the IT leaders in enterprise mobility and enterprise architecture looking at, is how do they report back to their own businesses around the metrics of end user computing performance. And so as a good example of that is, let's say you run end user computing at a bank, for example, and you've got a bunch of traders that start next week. How do you ensure that they get a seamless onboarding experience? How do they get a device shipped directly to their house that is configured, that they don't need to be on the phone with someone from IT, that gets their applications successfully delivered? And then you can actually go measure that performance and go, okay, we've delivered these security policies down to the device, we've delivered these applications, and this is the score that we've now got. We've got a device score, we've got a user score, and we can report those metrics back to management and say, look, those last few onboarding experiences, we've had them as a 7 or an 8 out of 10. And some of those insights is really where we're starting to get this area too. So around onboarding, we're trying to integrate with, we've integrated with Dell We've integrated with other hardware OEMs around this idea of dropship provisioning. So being able to sort of take away from traditional imaging process that IT does and instead get that done in the factory, where Dell would be able to go pull those applications that you have in your Workspace ONE console, enroll the device in the factory, ship the device directly to the user. The user goes through quite a nice and a seamless onboarding experience, and they're able to get access to their applications and work immediately. We're then using the insights that we get from the device to then go take proactive actions on the device. So it's, based upon this particular threat vector that we see, can we go take an action on the device, alert the user, remove some applications, do a multi-tiered process, integrate that into an existing ServiceNow workflow or something like that that alerts things? Can we potentially monitor the status of the battery on a Windows device and say, your battery level is below 30%, no problem. Let's just go start off an automation workflow that kicks off a ticket and orders you a brand new battery, and then alerts the user that, hey, we've detected that your battery level is lower. We've got a ticket out there for you. So it's those value-added insights, I think, is going to be where this enterprise mobility, UEM market sort of goes to. And this idea of going, not only do we have all of this phenomenal information about how the device performs and what's being delivered to it, but what actions can we take to fit that into a business workflow and a process? That's what you're going to see a lot of around VMware Explore, and that's going to be really the value proposition of our solutions going forward.
That's interesting because we've been looking in my team. We do social media marketing as well as the expert programs and community programs. We've been looking at like what kind of SaaS marketing could we do? Like what is SaaS, right? Like who has SaaS? What are our products? What do we have in SaaS? And then high level, we know what products we have. Everything is going to be SaaS, right? Like vRealize Automation, Workspace, everything is going to be SaaS delivered from your favorite cloud vendor. But then what does it mean to be a good SaaS vendor? And what you touch on, which is the number one thing that our research has shown, is a seamless onboarding. Seamless onboarding from a desktop perspective, or seamless onboarding of a SaaS solution as an IT practitioner, right? Like, how long does it take you? How much training do you need? How easy is it to click and get your services up and running to be able to manage your services? And so looking at what makes a good SaaS delivery vendor, right? Like what makes me a better SaaS solution than somebody else is these type of things. Right, the soft skills of one-click onboarding, right? So that how much training do you need, et cetera.
Yeah, well, the crazy thing about all of this is, in this world of SaaS applications, if you don't like what IT is giving you because it's cumbersome, has too many clicks, and it's not effective, I have a credit card and I can go sign up for whatever I want, right? You'll end up in this idea of shadow IT and having user accounts everywhere in non-approved systems if you don't incentivize your end users. If you don't give them things like single sign-on, give them the ability for a seamless onboarding experience, give them the ability to be as productive as they possibly can. I mean, people ultimately just want to do their job and they want to do it faster. If they're going to go find another tool to do it, as an IT organization, we've failed. And we want to make sure that, at least from a Workspace ONE perspective, we are giving people the platform to go deliver these applications, deliver these policies, and deliver these configurations in the most effective manner possible.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's neat. That's neat. All right. As we come up to Explore, are you doing sessions? Do you get invited? Where actually, I meant to ask you, where do you actually live or sit?
So I'm based out of Atlanta.
That was the home of AirWatch.
That was the old Air. So yeah. So when I joined,
one of my guys works out of the Atlanta office. He doesn't go to the office anymore, but it was all because AirWatch was there. We had an office.
Exactly.
So that makes sense. Yeah, that makes sense.
Yep. So
I hear it's
when I joined, we were all. Yeah. I mean, it's. Let me look at it.
I hear it's very hot today.
Yeah, it's 90. It's like 90 today. It's
in spring.
Yeah, it's not pretty. It's not pretty right now. It's funny. So Atlanta's that place that. The 3 months of summer, don't go anywhere.
Don't just stay inside. So you're out of Atlanta. Do they let you come to VMware? Have you been to VMworld before?
I have. I've presented at the last 6.
Okay.
So I did. What was it? It was the last 2 virtuals, the one in San Fran before, and the 2 in Vegas. 3 in Vegas, 2 in Vegas, something like that. So I did all of those. I did a couple in Barcelona as well. So I'm hopefully going to go again this year. I've submitted a bunch of sessions and I've been working with our marketing team to see what are the sort of areas that we're focusing on. So hopefully we'll have a session on dropship provisioning. Myself and a colleague, we did a webinar just the other week that we recorded that will be released next month around dropship provisioning that we'll probably end up doing a session at Explore about. So I'll be around, I hope, at Explore. So seek me out, and like
Nice.
a bunch of us enterprise mobility people will all be there and having fun, and looking forward to seeing some people in person.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So glad to hear it. I know that a lot of people are kind of on the fence trying to figure out whether they make the leap. Then then it did, right? So people have started to make the leap. We've got, as I said at the beginning of the podcast, people showing up. It is the last 5 minutes of the show. We do live stream on TalkShoe as well as on YouTube. So YouTube, our channel is youtube.com/vbarbecue, VBARBECUE. You can go check out what Adarsh looks like and see what he is. We live stream there. You can give us a like and a follow if you want. No big deal either way. We just record it so that people can see what people look like. So if they see him, so we then talk about vBarbecue because it is almost lunchtime here in California. And we spend a little time inviting the experts to the barbecues when we get together at VMworld. So the question for you is, in Atlanta, do they even have barbecue? Do you come from Australia, where they do barbecue there? What's your barbecue history, and what is your favorite barbecue to make or to eat?
Yeah, firstly, I've been on the barbecue at VMware Explore, so I'll meet you down there at the barbecue that we have. Yes, Atlanta has barbecue. And I'm sure someone from Atlanta is going to get really annoyed at me for saying this. It's kind of a bit of a hodgepodge. We got the Carolinas. I'm learning this on the fly, by the way. So
okay, right.
In Australia, we don't have barbecue the way you guys do, which I'll get to in a second. But we got the Carolinas, and people from the Carolinas are passionate about barbecue. Some of them transplant into Atlanta. You got like Texas. Some of them transplant into Atlanta. It's very much that hodgepodge mixed city kind of thing. There's a place. So where the Atlanta office is, it's kind of north of town. If you sort of go northwest of town, right by the Brave Stadium, there's a place called Heirloom Barbecue. And it is I'm going to get this wrong. The husband's from, I want to say, North Carolina, and the wife is from Korea. There's a massive Korean community in Atlanta. So you kind of end up in this like weird fusion of Korean barbecue, Southern barbecue style. Probably my favorite place in town. Absolutely phenomenal. Nice. But for the Aussies that might listen to this, and anyone else who wants to know, the way we do barbecue in Australia, every Australian should know about this. Saturday mornings at a place called Bunnings, which is our equivalent of the Home Depot, they run a sausage sizzle out in the morning, which is basically a grill.
That's smart.
It's sausages, it's onions, it's the world's worst bread. It's like that light, crappy bread. You got a little bit of barbecue sauce and a little bit of tomato sauce, and almost all the money goes, and it's like donation to the Lions Club or something like that. But it's almost an institution. Saturday mornings, everyone is like going to go out to the hardware store, going to go get a sausage sandwich. We're going to go get a sausage sizzle, and that's it. Like that's the barbecue we're used to at home. So to see something that's cooked for 13, 14, 18 hours sounds insane to me, because it's 2 minutes for us.
That's a great story. That is beautiful, and it reminds me of the story here in California. We have a lot of cattle, and so tri-tip is the big thing. And people rub tri-tip. Some people don't want to have any rubs. You just cook it without anything, and you just slice it perfectly with garlic bread. And then other people will put a dry rub on it, and some people will put even a wet rub on it. But it is interesting to hear your perspective. And in America, there's just the zones of barbecue.
Oh,
right?
for sure.
Then, mixing them up is interesting. It makes me understand why so many Americans are a little bit heavy, because we've actually just turned barbecue and food into this kind of just thing that everybody worries about. So it is fun. Thanks a lot. We always ask, do you have a Twitter handle that people can follow you at?
Yep, at Adarsh Kesari. So at first name, last name. So really easy.
So, ADARSH KESARI.
Yep, you got it. So that's that. Reasonably active on Twitter. The other plug that I want to put in, if you are interested in learning about anything sort of enterprise mobility related, anything Workspace ONE related, techzone.vmware.com. is where all of the digital workspace documentation is. There's some phenomenal resources, much like webinars, but there's also reference architectures and other documentation in there. So that's the place to go. Lots of really good stuff in there. I've written a bunch of articles, but there's way smarter people than me on there.
All right, techzone.vmware.com. Go check it out. Learn about Workspace One. Always good. Thanks a lot for coming on the show. It's been fun. You're an excellent guest, I got to say. You just very articulate and great to listen to. I learned a couple things, so thanks a lot. And you've been on the desktop journey the whole way. It'll be fun to see where it all goes as we continue our IT journey through life.
Yeah, absolutely. And thanks for having me, and looking forward to seeing people at VMware Explore. Yeah,
me too. Talk to you later. Again, we'll be back here again next week. I think we got a Tanzu show scheduled, so we'll talk a little bit more about Tanzu, and go talk to your boss about coming to VMware Explore. Should have a lot of fun things to explore. See everybody there, and if you're a vExpert, you might want to convince your boss to come, because there might be Intel NUC in the game. See you again next week.